So what happens if your name doesn't match when you go to sell your home and you write the contract and then that's the wrong name on the deed and the closing preparations? So Ari, help us out. Because this does happen.
It does, and it's one of those things with all due respect. I'm not oftentimes involved in real estate transactions and closings. Right. I'm on the planning side. And so when I get called into an issue with the closing, I know it's almost always this issue, right? That it oftentimes happens when a child is selling for a living parent that isn't able to do stuff for themselves, or the child is, or it's an heir, someone who's inherited property, a beneficiary. And so what happens is the property in the property records is still registered to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, mom and dad. It goes to the 3 kids, but when the listing agreement was written, of course never with you, right, with someone who's not paying close attention, with the listing agreement says it's still Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the contract that's offered and ratified says Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and we're going through settlement, everything's going, we're ready for Mr. and Mrs. Smith to sign, and then someone says, wait a minute, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are deceased. They don't actually own the property anymore. Right. It's just that there hasn't been an update to the property records. Right. So oftentimes it's a very simple fix. It's filing what's called a real estate affidavit that says this person died, they didn't have a will, they did have a will, here's who owns it now. It's literally a 1-page form that you fill out, you pay a very, very small recording fee for, and it's done. But it's one of those things when everyone's worried about getting to closing. Folks are like, well, when do we get paid? Someone's waiting on, the seller is waiting on that money because they need to put it somewhere else, and the purchaser, of course, wants to be in the property. It can be a big mess. It's a really, really easy thing to avoid. Certainly, if you are a beneficiary of property that you've inherited, working with an attorney ahead of time before you go to start selling the property to make sure there's a coordination in who's the actual property owner now? How do we list this? It can also be solved really simply in the listing agreement, where you just kind of include a little extra, like, or whoever happens to own the property. So sometimes you'll see something, this is being sold by Mr. Smith or assigns. That's also done when you're not sure if you're going to take the property personally or if you put it into an LLC or something. Right. You want there to be the flexibility that you don't have to go through a whole new contract in order to, actually make this closing happen.
And our real estate contracts, so we have 2 different systems in our area, and one contract already includes and assigns, the other one does not, so you have to include that, which a lot of people don't think about unless they've done investing as a real estate agent.
Oh, interesting.
Because we're not really taught that. They don't really teach you what you actually need to know in real estate school, just how to pass the exam, basically. So if you don't know that because of something else, a lot of agents don't know.
That's really interesting. And that's kind of like the inverse of what it is in law school. You learn all the totally impractical stuff, and you don't learn how to pass the exam. Right. So, but it's a really interesting intellectual exercise.
Right. Okay, so there you go. You have to think about these things.
Absolutely.